It's finally here! F1 24 has been released for early access, so I jumped right into the experience for the very first time. Honestly, I have some mixed feelings, so I'd like to share my first impressions, some pros and cons, and if the game is worth the hefty price tag. There's a lot to go over, so let's get right into it. First, I want to share my overall impressions of the game upon jumping in. There's been lots of talk about a brand new handling model in this version of the F1 game. To quote the developers, "Dynamic handling will redefine the feeling of the car to produce a more realistic and predictable performance across the wheel and pad." Now, obviously this is kind of vague, so they doubled down by explaining that the handling gives the driver a more realistic feel of weight distribution, and that the new handling gives a better sense of the car's reaction through varying speeds of corners. Now, since other creators and esports drivers have had earlier access than me, they've reviewed this new handling system and said it's absolutely terrible, so my expectations were pretty low. Upon hopping into time trials, I did immediately notice a big difference in the car's handling compared to last game. Now usually this happens every year from game to game, the cars just feel different. However, this time it's a bit more dramatic of a difference. For starters, the car feels both light and heavy at the same time. The front end is super grippy, and turning into corners is instant. In fact, the front end is so grippy that it almost feels too sensitive for the steering. It's a very weird feeling. So turning into a corner is ultra responsive, but once in the corner, I noticed an immediate switch to a very understeery feeling, like the car felt really heavy and wide. I mostly noticed this in medium speed corners. Obviously, I've never driven a real F1 car, but I would be surprised to learn that this feeling through a corner is more realistic than last year's game. As far as rear grip goes, that's also a bit weird. When putting the power down on corner exit, you can be insanely aggressive. I had to check like 5 times that I didn't have traction control enabled. It was a really weird feeling. As soon as the wheels go straight, you can pretty much stomp the throttle down without any worry of spinning, and when you start accelerating at mid-corner, it feels like you can instantly put a ton of power down. However, sometimes during medium-speed corners, you can get random kicks of snap oversteer, where the rear end just suddenly feels completely loose. It doesn't really make much sense. Lastly, locking up is way more prevalent in this year's game. If you turn the wheels even slightly under braking, you instantly lock. On F1 23, I found it quite easy to avoid lockups, as the game gave you a lot of leeway, and to be honest, it wasn't very realistic. The locking up is definitely something you have to get used to in F1 24. It's also very prevalent with late braking into corners, and can really make you reconsider a late send up the inside. These are the biggest things I noticed right off the bat in terms of handling, but to be honest, the rest of the car's handling mechanics feel completely normal. I do agree that this is a big change, but I think it might have been a little bit over-exaggerated by other creators. The new F1 games have always had different handling from year to year. It's not something new to have a new handling model. Yes, this one is a big overhaul and it's definitely not perfect, but people saying it's totally undrivable are completely wrong. So now let's get into some pros and cons, starting with the bad news first. The first con is that the suspension in F1 24 is a bit unrealistic. For some reason, you're able to take very harsh curves with seemingly no problem at all. Curbs that in past games might bottom you out or spin you out now have pretty much no effect on your car. This really rewards ultra-aggressive driving and unrealistic moves into corners. This is part of the new handling model, as the suspension plays a huge role on how the car takes corners. I do believe that they will change this in a future patch to make it a little bit more realistic, but we'll have to see. It's definitely not a huge detriment to the F1 24 experience, but it's definitely unrealistic. As I mentioned during my first impressions, handling is a bit weird in this game. Again, it's definitely been over-exaggerated, but there's also some stuff that needs to be addressed in a future patch. There's definitely some issues with the over-grippiness of the front end of the car, and hear me out a bit, but I believe this is the main driver for complaints about the handling. With the front wheels being absolutely planted to the track, it gives you full confidence to enter a corner as fast as you can, which the car can't handle. Once you're in the corner, the understeer kicks in because you're going too fast. The grip of the front end is giving you, as the driver, the illusion that the car can handle the corner much faster than it actually can. If they fix this front end grip issue, it'll give the driver a better understanding of how fast they should actually enter a corner, and mitigate a lot of these complaints about how the handling is so bad. Also, the feeling of the game is a little bit too arcadey. Yes, I know, the F1 games have never really been a realistic simulator, but nor should they be. Formula 1 is a huge global sport and it's only getting more popular. This means that along with veterans who have played the F1 titles for years, there's a constant new base of casual players coming through every year. These games have to be challenging and realistic enough to satisfy those serious sim racers, but also arcadey and casual enough to be easy for someone that just got into F1. It's a challenging thing to do. However, with this year's title, the handling feels like it was made for a new player on a controller and then transferred over to a wheel. It just feels a little bit too clunky. Again, after all this feedback, I do believe they're going to make a lot of changes to the handling and prioritize the serious players a little bit more. But enough complaining, now let's get into some pros. I do think there are aspects of the handling that are more realistic, like the braking. As I mentioned before, locking up is so much easier, which is a more realistic mechanic in the game. This makes late braking more challenging and forces you to drive smarter and more calculated when making overtakes. I do really enjoy this as a challenge, as F1 23 felt unrealistic with how much slack you were given, even with all the assists turned off. I do think this is a good step for the F1 titles. As for the game modes, they removed the GT cars, which is fantastic news. I don't think anybody liked those. Career mode and My Team mode also have some new features as well, but I think the best change is now you can enter these modes as one of the real drivers on the grid, which is something I've always wanted. They also have new categories for R&D in these modes, which is a pretty nice change to make. I've always thought career mode and My Team modes in the F1 games were pretty well done, so it's nice to see that they didn't completely butcher it and actually made some nice updates to it. Also, the AI are actually pretty good right out of the gate. Usually when a new F1 game releases, the AI are completely and utterly terrible and they race like blind idiots. However, they finally got it right on release this time. The AI are pretty competitive at every level and don't make stupid errors as much. Obviously I've had minimal playtime in races, so I'm sure there's a few issues with them here and there, but overall they seem to be working pretty well. So, is F1 24 worth your money? First of all, $70 is absolutely insane and EA are super greedy, so that really sucks. The current state of this game is fine, there are some things they've done well and some things that need some work. $70 is a lot of money and it's definitely worth doing some research before purchasing. Everything online points to people absolutely hating the new handling, but again, it's a little bit overblown. Yeah, it's a bit weird and will take some time to get used to, but people forget that it will be patched and updated along the way. On top of that, every new F1 game has a different feel. I remember going from F1 21 to F1 22, felt like the end of the world. I was literally terrible at the game when it first came out, but then I got used to it. Every sports game franchise pretty much reskins the same game and updates the teams for the next year, and F1 is no different. Most of the appeal here is updated liveries, driver lineups, team rankings, and car performance. I do think this game was ambitious to actually try to make some changes with the driving, but they missed the mark on the first try, it happens. Personally, if you're a big F1 fan like me, I think it's worth buying. If you're a more casual fan, maybe wait to see if they patch the handling. I don't think any video game is worth $70, but since that's the norm for mainstream games now, I do believe this one is worth the money. If you take one thing away from this video, just remember that there's a lot of negative reviews of this game so far, and I think people are just jumping on the bandwagon to say that they also hate it. It definitely needs some work, and the work will be done. If you made it this far, thank you very much for watching, and let me know in the comments what you think of F1 24. I also have my Discord link down below if you want to have a conversation there. Anyway, I'll be posting a lot more F1 24 content, so stay tuned for track guides, tips videos, and My Team career mode.